Hi everyone, today I wanted to talk about the voltage multistage and the sequence selector, how they work together to create a nice, interesting sequencing system. I'll be using the complex oscillator and amplitude controller as a voice for demonstration purposes. The amplitude and tone controller is going into the multi-delay processor, which is going in turn into the scan and pan, and then into Ableton. There's also a clock, as you can see, which is coming from CV Tools in Ableton. We will start our demonstration with the voltage multistage clocked, and maybe we'll touch afterwards what you can do without the clock, because this has its own clock input. For some reason, the voltage multistage seems to confuse people, so I get a lot of questions about it. At the heart of it, it's a very open-ended CV generator, so it can be a sequencer, it can be an envelope, it can be an LFO. To be honest, I've never used it as an LFO or an envelope. There are nice videos on YouTube about this. I'll let you watch them. I'll probably link them down below. I'm just gonna concentrate on the sequencer use. So I have a gate out that's coming into the multi-envelope. I am mixing the envelope into the control voltage processor. Actually, I'm mixing nothing for now because there's just one output that's going to open the amplitude and tone controller. But I've set it up this way so that if we want to mix several envelopes later down the road, I don't have to unpatch it. So for now, basically, it's doing nothing. So the sequence selector is not clocked for now. We'll use it afterwards. So yeah, the voltage multistage is an 8-step sequencer, like any old school 8-step sequencer. You have the switches, which have 3 positions: off, right now, on, like this, and a slide on top. There are 2 rows of CV, CVA and CVB. I'm using CVA to sequence. As you might have seen, I'm using CVA to go into the CV input and not into the volt per octave input. Why is this? Because this one has an input attenuator and or even inverter. You can attenuate the coming voltage from the voltage multistage. The voltage multistage are short sliders, and they go from 0 to 10 volts. So that's a lot of octaves, 10 actually. So if you want to sequence anything remotely musical, melodical, whatever, it's much easier to go into the CV input and attenuate on the module, on the complex oscillator, or with an attenuator if your oscillator of choice doesn't have such an input. It should probably have an FM input, but you might want to use it for something else. So yeah, I'm attenuating it. And if you were to use a quantizer in between the voltage multistage and the complex oscillator, then you should go into the voltage volt per octave to keep the quantized values. Otherwise, this is going to destroy everything. In my opinion, this is not the point of the sequencer. It's not to do anything very melodical. It's perfect for riffs, techno. It's perfect for rhythmic stuff. Like if you have a drum modules, this is a great drum sequencer. It does only 1 layers of gate, but that's a great sequencer with lots of nice tricks up its sleeve. So the very basic operation, once you have a clock going on, is just flick a switch and then it's going to trigger or gate the envelope, which is going to in turn open your VCA. So that's what we're doing here. We have 2 consecutive gates. Let's take another one. And if you move the slider, then value is sent to the oscillator. Basic, easy. So we have 8 steps. An interesting feature about the voltage multistage is the way it resets. So the strobe input is actually a reset. But it's more flexible than just a reset, which we would go back to the first step of your sequence. You can have it reset at any point in the sequence of 8 steps. So you could use an external module to do this. We're just going to take one of the gates, take like the 8th gate, or let's say 6, put in the strobe, and then it's going to be a 5-step sequence. It's going to do 5 steps, and then when it reaches the steps number 6, is go back to the beginning. Why does it go back to the beginning? Because the analog knob is set all the way counterclockwise. If you put it any other way, it's going to change the reset point. So here you can see it's resetting at number 2, 3, 4. We don't have any gates here, so that's why there's no sound. And then it's going to jump. Here is, if you put it past the point where you reset the gate, it's going to jump it. So here it does every gate except the number 6, which can be interesting. So the interesting thing about this is that the analog knob is voltage controllable. So you have a voltage controllable reset, which is interesting. So let's say you have 7 steps. That's a nice 7-step sequence. Then you can use the second row of CV to create modulations. That's 10 volts on each slider to be able to modulate anything you like. That's quite subtle, but it works. You can keep it at that. It's simple, but it's okay. You can use also any of the gates to sequence or to modulate stuff. So what I like to do is using like a gate output and put it into any of the inputs of the multi-envelope. Most envelope have CV inputs, like function here, you have inputs for rise and fall. This one is the ADSR, but that's quite the same principle. You can take any output and put it here, and then it's going to bring movement. So that's interesting, but that's still quite repetitive. What you can do is use the sequence selector and its sequential switches to have this not happen every time. So you can use the voltage multistage to clock the sequence selector, so they're always related in a way, but you can also use any clock divider of your liking. Pamela's workout. I have a Doppler A160-2, which is a simple but very useful clock divider. It's dividing my clock that's coming from Ableton. I have set it to prime numbers. So you can take any division and put it the advanced input, and it will effectively advance every time there's a clock input. So instead of taking the gate and putting it directly into the decay of the envelope, you can put it into the sequence selector first, so that your modulation will only happen when it's going through that step. I just missed it. And you can clock it faster so that it happens more often. You can even combine gates from the voltage multistage with a simple voltage adder from Joanna, but there are plenty modules like this. It's going to combine the gates and advance twice, you see. So that's just a way to have some modulation happen some of the time and not every time. There's also a reference output which you can use to modulate as well. The reference output is basically sending a short AD envelope on every step. It doesn't depend on the switches, it's sending one on every step. So you can put it and use it like that. If we put it directly into the VCA, you can hear opening the VCA. Which is nice. One thing we haven't talked about yet is the big time button, which if you don't clock the voltage multistage, it's the clock time, basically, the clock speed. But when the voltage multistage is clocked, it has several effects. This is the minimum value here, and if you increase it, it's gonna make the gate longer. So this will have an incidence on your envelope, on the sustain stage, and also on the slide time, the time it takes to reach one node to the other sliding. And this will also have an incidence on the reference output. The envelope will be longer and longer. So that's where we are now with the minimum time, and hopefully it makes something if I turn that down. You can hear the reference output with the envelopes going longer. As well as the gate output being much longer as well. You can regulate this with the sustain stage, but if your gate is long, the envelope is going to be long. And this is also voltage controllable, so you can use it like, let's take an output from the quantized random of the random sampling, put it into the second signal selector, and then put it into the CV row, the CV input of the time. Every time it's going to pass this step, the fourth, where I've put my value from the random sampling, it's going to impact the time. So we have only 8 steps going on, even 7 steps actually, but still there's quite a lot of movement. Just using the voltage multistage, one envelope and one external modulation, but everybody has some modulation laying around. So that's a start. We will then go on to another patch. So here every slider is off, but it's only the reference output that's opening the VCA. So you see it's independent from the sliders. So another thing you can do with the sequencer selector, this was just using the signal selector, basically a sequential switch. You can pretty much do everything I've shown you here with a little sequential switch here, like A51, the most basic Dolphin module there is, but very, very useful. The only difference is this one has 5 steps. This one can only go 3, 2, or 4. I like that there's 5 steps because it's never gonna happen every time with odd numbers. You have a nice interaction interplay with the 8 steps of this one, or 7 steps, or whichever number you chose, and the 5 steps here. So another thing you can do is instead of tapping the CV here directly in from the voltage multistage and going into the complex oscillator, I'm going to put it into CV out. And we are going to use the sequencer selector to transpose our sequence from the voltage multistage. So I'm going to put the CVA into the transpose input, and then we will just move a couple sliders. These are 0 to 10 volts, same as the voltage multistage. Basically, the whole Verbos range is works with 10 volts, so it's really useful to have strong modulation like this to open the VCA completely, or really push your oscillators or whichever filters you have into deep modulation. It's quite useful. So I'm going to create a sequence with the sliders. Just make it dry. Simple sequence. And now, as you can see, the slider selected is down. If I select any of the stage where the slider is up with the buttons, then it's going to transpose the sequence running here. It's going to add the value of the slider here to the value of the sliders there. So if you fine-tune this, it can create a complex arpeggiator with the voltage multistage and the sequencer selector. You can play by hand with the buttons, or just send it a clock and then it's going to automatically go through the different values. You don't even have to use all the 5 steps. You can just do 2 different values. You reset it in the same way, except this one has input for every stage, whereas this one, you select the reset input with the analog knob. So here it's oscillating in between these 2. Quite an annoying sequence, but you get the point. Another useful and quite basic way to use the sequence selector, but once again, you could do this with a sequential switch. Any one you have will be fine, is to chain the CVA to the CVB. So the voltage multistage only has 1 layer of gate. So it's going to be always the same gate pattern, but you can fake 16 steps by having the first values of sliders red, then the second values of sliders red by the voltage, the sequence selector. So the CVA is going to be the first input, the CVB second input, and the third stage output is resetting. So it's going to be 1, 2, 1, 2. I'm going to create a simple sequence. Let's put every step. Oops, I need to put that here. So that's only CVA. I have a gate on every step, and this one has nothing going on. This one is not clocked, so let's take a gate output and clock it with like this, and it's going to go one row, the other row. So it's a way to make longer sequences, but sharing the same gate pattern. Not very interesting, but once again, you get the point. So I've shown you how you can reset this one with either just going into strobe or manipulating the analog input with CV. This one you can directly stage select with CV or the buttons, or there's also the analog input here, which will select the stage with CV. So you can have it jumping in between values with different CV values. If you don't want to clock it, you can clock it more creatively than just with the clock. And I think you can combine the two. So yeah, there's a clock going and the CV is also going to affect the selection of the stage. So if you have modulation going into the signal selector and then being sent to another module, it makes for powerful and irregular patterns. So maybe we will try to exemplify all this with some musics, because for now there hasn't been any music, so let's go. Hopefully it's okay. Something I haven't shown you yet is taking another of the outputs. There are tons of outputs on there. There's like 5 outputs. So take another envelope, put it here. You can mix it in the control voltage processor, so that's gonna open the VCR differently. This sort of creates velocity with the different events going on, and there's only one gate opening the decay more and another envelope opening the VCA a bit more, and just that makes some nice movements, which as you know, techno is based on repetition, and it makes the repetition bearable. Here I'll be using the gate out to have one gate, triggering a second envelope from the multi-envelope to open a VCA in which I have some feedback going on. that's it for the video. I probably will do a different video about the internal clock thing. I think it's better if you consider that on its own. But I'm sorry this wasn't the most crazily interesting musical piece. It's just a quick tutorial on how to use this voltage multistage and the sequence selector to sequence your system. There are tons of gates, tons of CV on these two, so you can send modulation all around. It's a great sequencing system for techno, but also plenty of the genres. So yeah.